Hi, it's Joe Woods.
And Tom Hicks.
And welcome to the Family Values Podcast. So I'm going to start this off by saying, last week we did say we were going to do a hour special on the current sort of German political situation because it's relatively intriguing, you know, the federal system and how certain parties can surge in states and take over states, yet because of the decentralised system, it affects nothing in the general course of, you know, centralised politics. But we're going to steer away from that this week just because too much has happened in British Parliament this week we can't ignore. So this week is going to be kind of completely just a recap of what has happened over the last week and what potentially is going to happen beginning of next week. Tom, take us away.
Well, I think it's they say that a week is a long time in politics, and I don't think there has ever been a better example of that this week, because it seems a long time away for when we were expecting a proroguing of Parliament to happen on this Monday, and now we're expecting it not to happen at all, effectively, if it is going to happen, or at least it's going to be delayed to the maximum opportunity because of the events of this week. But I think we're gonna draw back at the beginning to go through it, because it's just crazy, the actual context and the amount of shit. Sorry.
I mean, the problem is we're now, you know, just a kind of a quick recap of what happened last week. So obviously on Monday we had the vote for Parliament to take over the agenda of the Brexit agenda and the negotiation agenda. Instantly, as was predicted, the next day Johnson called a general election. It didn't pass. The House didn't support it. Labour didn't support it. So we're now in this deadlock.
We're in a situation where the government wants a general election, but the leader of the opposition does not want a general election, which is completely the opposite to what it was a couple of weeks ago, when the government was claiming that a general election was a terrible idea and would not solve anything, and the opposition was desperate for one.
Corbyn, pretty much from taking power within the Labour Party, has always called for a general election,
which is his prerogative. It'd be strange if he wasn't calling for a general election, which is the situation now.
His job is to take it where he can. But the problem is, there is, I think, quite a quite well-founded suspicion that Johnson is going to use a general election this close to Brexit date to prorogue Parliament,
to effectively suspend and wind down the clock and actually not give Parliament an opportunity to block a no-deal Brexit, which there is a clear majority in Parliament to do that.
But Johnson kind of mistimed this and fucked up by instantly trying to get the vote for a general election through the House this week to basically stop Parliament taking over the agenda of Brexit. Why he's fucked up is essentially there's going to be no general election, and they're now stuck in a place where it's either negotiate or nothing.
Yeah. And there's a very weird dynamic in Parliament now, because of course there was 20-odd Tory rebels who defied the whip and as a result had the whip taken away from them. And there is effectively a majority for Jeremy Corbyn on Brexit-related issues, but on no other related issues. And Johnson, now because of these rebels, has not just a no majority, but has very, very weak minority government, even with the DUP propping him up.
And for the moment, Johnson and the Conservative Party's agenda is led by Dominic Cummings. Not necessarily the agenda, but the strategy is led by Dominic Cummings. He led the Leave side's Vote Leave campaign during the referendum. He's generally a bit of a disliked figure within sensible circles, so to speak, just because generally he's a bit of a loose cannon. He's not actually a member of the Tory party. He was caught on video at a conference 2 years ago saying that the Tories don't care about people like you and me and you.
Was it a UKIP conference, wasn't it?
Was it? Yeah, I think it was a UKIP conference. I'd have to check that back over, but I'm sure it was. It was before UKIP went down the full BNP route.
Right.
But was on the verge of doing so. But, I mean, first we're just going to take it from the beginning. So it was the vote to take over the House.
Yep, and to explain for anybody who's unfamiliar with the intricacies of the British Constitution, normally the government are the ones who set the agenda for the House of Commons, and they are the ones who effectively say, this is what we're going to discuss, this is what we're going to vote for, but the actual procedures of the House was taken over and by the opposition, which has only happened once before, also for a Brexit-related issue, to stop no deal in March this year. So effectively, there's now it is in the British Constitution that this can happen because it's happened before, because it's an unwritten constitution.
I will say this is hilarious. Going from this time last week, where we were talking about Remain voters and Remain parts of Parliament, saying that Johnson had now taken part in essentially a Parliament coup d'etat and had wiped out essentially Parliament's say into pushing through a no-deal Brexit. We're now in a place, a week later, where we're back to Leavers claiming that Parliament is acting without the government, or without the Leave kind of prerogative.
And against the people, as it were. And this is the thing that Johnson has always wanted to set up, and it's quite a clear strategy that everyone can see, where Johnson wants to set up an idea of the people versus the Parliament for a general election campaign, with Boris Johnson being representative of the people. And getting people who would never vote Tory but really want to leave to back him, or at least back a Brexit party which is an alliance with him. But that's more difficult to actually have, because Nigel Farage this weekend for a few weeks has basically laid down his negotiating position. There's a weird negotiation within the Leave camp, as it were, as to what type of Brexit there should be, and Farage has basically said, you've got to go no deal, otherwise we're going to stand candidates.
Which, can I just pull bullshit on, by the way, because Farage is the man, and I remember standing in my kitchen cooking a beef goulash of all things in 2015, listening to LBC when he said, no one is talking about leaving the EU without a deal. We are talking about having a deal like Norway. And the reality, I remember that. The reason I remember that is because I remember screaming at my radio, you're misleading people, because that would mean freedom of movement. And that's specifically why I remember that. And Farage, I call bullshit on this. I think the reason he's now, in this position of only no deal is Brexit, and that's all I've ever believed, is because from the word go, from Leave winning the referendum, Leave voters, not Brexiteers, because Brexiteers obviously are political figures, Leave voters were never going to go for what they were calling at the time a compromise. So I think because let's be honest, Farage is somewhat savvy, I think he picked up on going, all right, that we can only go no deal because that's the only way I could still potentially get into power.
Well, that seems to be his prerogative in the moment, and he's effectively laid down the gauntlet for an alliance, and says we're very happy to have an alliance with the Tories as long as you go for no deal, which is the opposite of what Boris Johnson is saying right now. He is saying consistently that he wants a deal. Now, whether you believe or don't believe Boris Johnson is an entirely different story, but I tend to think that he is trying to get the withdrawal agreement with a few changes, remove the backstop, and then say this is the Boris Johnson withdrawal agreement.
I think the exact same thing. I think he wants the withdrawal agreement without the backstop, essentially, and obviously, and maybe some freedom of movement elements taken out, kind of the 2-year clause that was supposed to be in place with that, the transitionary period.
Yeah, and they're changing to the political declaration to make it sound like there's going to be less of a close political relationship between the United Kingdom and the European Union, to effectively go back to both the ERG and say this isn't Mrs May's withdrawal agreement, this is Mr Johnson's withdrawal agreement, which is more of a hard Brexit withdrawal agreement, which the ERG are not going to buy.
Where did the ERG stand at the moment, though? This is the problem.
They've said that anything that resembles the withdrawal agreement, they're not going to accept. And people like Michael Fabricant have been very
problem being
vocal about that.
The only agreement you're going to reach, any agreement you're going to reach with the EU, is going to, in one way or another, reflect the May's arrangement.
Why would the EU have any, from a negotiating standpoint, they've got this thing which was agreed by a British government, and it's very benefit, and from their perspective I think they like that deal because it will effectively mean that they can control what we
and
the British
to
economy.
make it clear, I do think May's agreement was one of the only realistic agreements we could actually take or push through. As much as I know you probably disagree with me on that one, or at least you disagree with the sentiment, again, as I've just said, what other agreement are we going to get with the EU?
Well, there is, and I'm not too sure, and this is just something that I've heard panelled about, but allegedly Michel Barnier did offer Theresa May a bog standard free trade agreement at the beginning of the negotiations, and she said, no, I need a softer Brexit, effectively.
Yeah.
Because she didn't think, rightly or wrongly, that Parliament were going to go for anything that resembled a hard Brexit. So, when you look back at it now, she was trying to please the whole of Parliament rather than just trying to please her party.
The nature of politics is you can try and please Parliament all you want, but naturally a big chunk of Parliament is going to go with what their constituencies want, and because most of the constituency of fucking don't know how basically general diplomacy, political kind of procedure, and how general economics works, they're going to scream for no deal. Yeah. Because they see any compromise with the EU. Let's be honest, I hate doing this, but in a lot of people's minds they still put Brexit in with the stopping or the halting of free movement. So there's and I've said this before, there's this subconscious thing in a lot of Leave voters' mind that no deal is their last ditch attempt to stop effectively any immigration from the EU.
I think that's
sorry. Let me correct myself there. Not to stop any further immigration from the EU, but the last ditch attempt to send EU immigrants home, which was never going to happen anyway.
I think there is still that element there, but from my understanding of listening to Leave voters on sites like LBC and listening to YouTube channels and whatnot, is that might have been the motivation at the beginning and during the EU referendum, but I think a lot of people are now in the Leave camp the majority of people in the Leave camp do view it through the lens of sovereignty. Because once you view it through the lens of sovereignty, it's very difficult to not view it through that lens.
Sovereignty from those Leave voters, is now, because right at the beginning, even Farage made it clear, but obviously the government under May made it clear that they're not going to start, deporting people. Which, by the way, I think we touched on it last week, but actually they might start doing it if Priti Patel is away. Problem being, May said from the off she was not going to deport anyone. Farage even said, "Oh no, I never said we were going to deport anyone," because he could now say that because it was post referendum. A lot of Leave voters had this weird 180 where they said, "Oh, we can no longer." Sending people home is no longer a legitimate reason to leave the EU, so it's now this byword. It's now this kind of buzzword, sovereignty. And by the way, it's never a word I can pronounce, but it's sovereignty. It's now a buzzword for immigration.
I strongly disagree with that.
Or a cover word.
I strongly disagree with that. I do believe that what most Leave voters now see in the European Union, I think that we view the political entity, that is the European Union, as much more of a lot more down the road of the United States of Europe than a lot of Remain voters do.
Yeah, I think that's become part of the debate. I think there's now this element in a lot of Leave voters' mind that the EU, it's now become this thing where it's more about the EU being the enemy as opposed to it just being a one issue basis.
Yes,
but
it's not so much as the enemy. It's just we don't want to be part of it, as it were. And that's
but there is this weird jingoistic fucking World War II talk, which, in all honesty, it bugs me to no end, because we're not at war with our closest neighbours. We're talking about trying to preserve trade between our closest neighbours and our biggest the biggest chunk of our trade.
I don't like the comparisons to World War II as well, because I think that's just more of a it's pulling us something out of our history that everyone unites around and trying to apply it to a political situation today, which is something that I think both sides have been doing, because you see this week with Nicholas Soames, who is the grandson of Winston Churchill and one of the Tory rebels that got expelled. And I think there's this unsaid thing that, we must listen to this man more because he is the grandson of Winston Churchill.
Which means naff.
No, I don't give a shit who his granddad was. I care about what the man's political opinions are, which on the EU I strongly disagree with.
By the way, I sympathise not just with Soames, but with all these. He's not a heavy hitter within the Conservative Party, so to speak. All these other heavy hitters within the Conservative Party: Ken Clarke, Rory Stewart, Philip Hammond. They've got rid of Philip Hammond, who is. You could not get more establishment Conservative Party than fucking than Cameron at this point than Hammond. They've kicked Hammond out of the party. I sympathise with them. They just have a differing view. They have their own political agenda. Because that's why that's why people become MPs. It's why people become councillor wards. It's why people go into politics. You have a view and an agenda. And because now, for some fucking reason, the Conservative Party is ruled by Cummings and Rees-Mogg.
It's an interesting one because it's something that most of the time I would say that a big tent mentality is a good thing to have. I think the idea of particularly the two biggest parties having a wide view on the spectrum on the left and the right is a good idea because it means that you can actually work together to get into power, whereas if you all were just in your little libertarian bubbles or your little progressive bubbles or your little neoliberal bubbles, no one party is ever going to command a majority on that. But when saying that, now that we are in a time where there is a clear issue which clearly divides the country so much, having people within the political party that do have completely opposite views on that has been a recipe for disaster.
It is, well, in a situation like this, where not just the passion's so high, but also the process of leaving the EU is so complicated, beyond anything that we can comprehend in regards to treaties, paperwork, trying to keep red tape at bay. That it's so complicated that trying to get people with differing opinions at different scales of the same political ideology it's hard. It's difficult. But the problem is that's Parliament for you. I'm going to say this going to both Labour and to Conservative in regards to both the ERG and to Momentum, because they're now taking up the same fucking tactics of purging the party of any centrists. Do you know what you're doing by kicking out these heavy hitter centrists who have brought your parties into power? You're sending them to the fucking Lib Dems.
Yeah.
Both the Conservative and Labour are sending their heavy hitters. The only people really that down the road are going to get them back into power or keep them in power, you're sending them to the Lib Dems.
Yeah, well, it's true, but it's a difficult situation, as I say, because I think that you need, if you have an issue like Brexit, which is just so dividing, you need to have the two biggest parties having completely clear and opposite views on that. Otherwise, it doesn't give people to actually a chance for people to vote for it.
Yeah.
And then within that, I would say that you need an alternative people who don't like it, which the Brexit Party and the Lib Dems sort of which gives people who are more right-leaning but pro-Remain can vote Lib Dems, and people who are more left-leaning can vote for the Brexit Party, because particularly as the Brexit Party might have Nigel Farage, but it has nowhere near the far-right taint that even pre-referendum UKIP had.
The Brexit Party is interesting because their second in command, I can't remember the name of now. Is it Anna something? Is it Anna Fox, or I can't remember her name?
I know who you're talking about. Who's a very, very left-wing person.
Well, she's ex-leader of the UK Communist Party. I actually in person saw her give a speech at the 80th anniversary commemoration march for Cable Street, for the Battle of Cable Street. I actually saw her give when she was still the leader of the UK Communist Party. I saw her give a speech there. That was an interesting. I'll get onto this another point, but that was really interesting because that was the day it confirmed for me Labour's issues with with anti-Semitism.
Yes,
and that actually involves her as well in regards to her, even as leader of the UK Communist Party, standing up at that event against the anti-Semites.
Yeah, I mean which is crazy. I mean, I remember you telling me stories about that, which it absolutely shocked me, the level of abuse that you personally heard.
But the point being is the current, because let's be honest, the Brexit Party is kind of the current continuation of UKIP the way it used to be, as in it was actually somewhat an electoral force.
Yeah.
And not an electoral force as in it's going to sweep the nation, I mean it as in it can actually be elected potentially to a seat or two.
Oh yeah, I think they've got a lot more bigger chance of being elected to seats than UKIP ever did. I think because they have these, as I say, a left-wing appeal where left-wing people don't feel guilty or tainted.
Yeah, they've taken the kind of right-wing twist off of UKIP.
Yeah, they're
just now a party about Brexit as opposed to being a right-wing party,
which just makes it interesting for the seats in the north.
Yeah,
because when going back to this potential election pact, if there is an election pact or a non-aggression pact with between the Tories and the Brexit Party, I reckon the Brexit Party can get a dozen seats in the North easy, because there's so many areas which are very, very heavily Leave but are very traditional Labour.
Well, you would think, what's his name? Frank Field's new party, we spoke about the other week, the Berkhamsted Social Justice Party.
Yeah.
You'd think a party like that, which is a left-wing Brexit party, would be able to take seats in North, but the reality is, I don't know how this goes elsewhere in the English-speaking world, but in the UK, particularly in England, generally the more traditionally left-wing, more socialist the area is, the more socially conservative it is.
Yes.
And that goes for the North.
Yeah.
So you can't win as a left-wing Brexiteer. You can't win even as a left-wing Brexiteer in the North if you've got social justice connected to your moniker, because it may be so kind of socialist. It may be socialist. It may be a socialist area, the North, particularly the North East, but it is definitely not socially left wing or liberal.
No, it's first of all we touched on the irony of them calling it the Social Justice Party, because that is that's the least favourite part of the left wing for most people up in the North.
Up in the North, yeah.
I think to compare it to a place in like the American Deep South, for instance, it's very interesting how in the North they are, as you say, socially conservative but economically left-wing. I think most people in this country both base their vote traditionally on economic issues rather than social issues, whereas in America it's very much social issues, which is where you get the very quite poor areas of America, and particularly in the Bible Belt, consistently voting Republican.
Conservative. But particularly in what are the big black areas of the South. I mean, because, black Southern people in America are generally more conservative.
Yes.
Even than white, Southern people.
Socially speaking, yes, but they still traditionally voted Democrat because they voted on social issues, as it were, or their actual race-based issues, as it were, because they... For a long time, the Republicans were not very welcoming.
But just to bring this back around to the original point, so the vote earlier this week to take control of the House, will take control of the Brexit agenda by the House. The Brexit Party are potentially they're an electoral force. They're dormant at the moment because they have no seats. They have European seats, which in reality means nothing.
No, means more than nothing than it normally does. Quite frankly,
because we are leaving at the end of the day.
Yeah,
and Johnson is very much aware of that, and that's where this all comes from. But the problem is Johnson acts so rash and so kind of off the hill, or sort of that he ends up sort of cornering himself.
Yes, he's a very much a risk taker, and it's worked quite well in his career thus far. But I think he bit off a little bit more than he could chew.
I don't know if I'm alone in thinking this, but am I the only one to now think that in the run-up to Johnson being elected, on the Leave side of things, there was this feeling that he's going to push everything forward and he's going to get us out, with no ties to the EU and no, and our sovereignty. And actually, since he's become Prime Minister, he's kind of fucked the process up.
Yeah, since he's become Prime Minister, everything he has been doing, he has been posturing and politicking for a general election where he's hoping to get a big mandate and to work his a very good record in election campaigns. He thinks he can apply that to a general election campaign and therefore get a majority, and therefore with people who are more loyal to him, which I think the whole Tory rebel expelling thing was always part of the plan, quite frankly, because he needs a more Brexit supporting, a more Eurosceptic Tory party so that he can get his deal through.
In reality, Johnson is looking beyond Brexit.
Yeah.
Whatever looking beyond Brexit means at the moment, he's looking at his political career, which to him is more important than Brexit.
Oh, hell yeah.
Yeah, to him.
I mean, it's the same with Jeremy Corbyn, because he's completely done a 180 on it, because he can almost smell the petunias at number 10 at this point. Because he's just... And he's basically... now he's got all the parties behind him as well. He's effectively, as I say, for Brexit-related issues, he's effectively got a working majority in the House. But not for any other issues.
So, basically, to either block Corbyn becoming Prime Minister and to block any potential of not... It's not about leaving without a deal in Johnson's mind. It's about not leaving on the 31st, is his main bugbear as to why he'd want to prorogue Parliament any way he can, or block Parliament any way he can. from not leaving without a deal on the 31st is because he in his mind, he must leave, deal or no deal, on the 31st, or his political future is nothing in his own mind.
Yeah, which I think is a bit silly, because now that he's actually got this... He gave up the democratic high ground when he did the proroguing of Parliament, because that's the one thing I think that Brexit, that Leavers have had on their side, as it were, is... We had the mandate from the people, we had a general election, so on the democratic ground, we, in the right, or I say we, the Leavers were in the right, as it were.
Yeah.
He has, basically by doing the proroguing of Parliament and by using Number 10 and the EU negotiations as politicking for a general election, he's given up a lot of that ground.
Yeah.
But if he had done a lot of the same strategy, but then obeyed, if he hadn't said he wasn't going to obey the law, which is something that's happened recently, he's rejected the idea that he's going to ask it, which is now part of the law.
Recently as yesterday, didn't he?
Yes, indeed. And he said he'd rather be dead in a ditch, which is his line.
Which he's going to eat those fucking words, by the way.
Yeah, because now he either has to break the law, ask for it, or resign. Those are his only three options at this point.
Do you see a resignation in the next few months?
Of Boris
Johnson, yeah.
Quite frankly, I think it's actually, at this point, the only and right political move. Resign as Prime Minister, but not as the leader of the Tory party, if that's possible. I'm not too sure.
Is that possible? I don't know.
Yeah. I would say that because he has the mandate from the Tory party membership, that he should definitely fight the next general election, whether he does vote from Number 10.
But there is no way in Boris's mind he's going down as the shortest-lived Prime Minister in UK history.
Which is going to be his downfall, as I say, because if he had actually resigned, and if he said, look, I can't disobey the law because I'm a man who obeys laws, I don't have a majority in Parliament, I cannot actually do this job, but I genuinely believe in Brexit, and the only way that I can do that is by coming out of Number 10 and getting elected as just a regular candidate.
Yep.
I think a lot of people will get very excited for a person, especially as everybody knows how much he loves that job and how much it's part of his inner persona. It is, but he thinks he's destined for this. Yep. If he gave that up, it would show people, or at least on the face of it, that he's proper for it.
Most people have known since the end of Johnson's term as Prime Minister, as Mayor of London, he will at some point become Prime Minister. Yeah. I didn't think it'd be as quickly. I didn't think it'd be within 3 years from, leaving the mayoral office. But
Jesus, so that short.
That short was 3 years.
Oh, God.
But we knew it. Most people knew it'd come at some point because there's no way he was not ending up in 10.
Yes, I think he didn't even know himself. I quite frankly, I think his strategy in going for the Leave campaign was never to win, but to be a hero and a man who fighted for the right cause during the one time when we had a referendum.
If anyone in America eventually listens to this, it would be similar, I suppose, to Biden. Biden will end up in office at some point. I suppose his only next chance, saying that, his only chance is the next election, because there's no way he'll run for the one after.
No, he's just too old, and this is his last opportunity. And a lot of people don't even know Joe Biden wants the job, quite frankly. It's just that this is his last opportunity to do it. We
have discussed that before. But at this point, I don't think Biden wants the job, but in the past, he definitely wanted it.
Yes.
He may now just be too old. Just doesn't want it, and he's now maybe losing his marbles a bit.
Yeah, it's interesting. He's about basically he's not too much older than Trump, but he looks, and he's younger than Bernie Sanders, but he looks so much older than those two. It's ridiculous.
Which is natural. Some people just end up aging.
Yeah.
And the point being is not to put down Joe Biden. It's just there's no way he can run for another election post the next one next year.
No.
And maybe actually the better example is not Biden, it might be Sanders.
Yeah.
Because Sanders will run and run and run.
Yeah, and he genuinely wants the job.
He wants the job.
Everyone knows that.
But the problem is Sanders is coming from too niche a position to do so.
Yeah. I tend to think that Sanders has he has a roof at about 25% of the Democrat. That's just of the Democrats, not even of the general public. And it's going to be, if Sanders does win the nomination, they will have so much fuel because he's had a long career and he's actually gotten more less left wing over his career. So there's some things that he said in the past which will just be used in attack.
I was going to ask a question, which was. Who do you see as the next candidate for the Democratic Party in the next election, which is next year? Mm-hmm. But we're not talking about this today.
No, there's plenty of time to do that.
Yeah,
Still 6 months left of that campaign.
We'll leave it over the next couple of episodes anyway.
Yeah.
The point being, going back to what we were talking about, Boris, this leads us on to the next point, or the kind of the next main event of the week just gone, this week, which was the blocking of the general election, the snap election that Boris was trying to call.
Yeah.
So there was rumours swirling around the day of the vote to take control by the House of the Brexit agenda that if Johnson lost the vote, which he was predicted to, he would call a general election, and on cue he did.
Yeah.
And the vote was the next day.
Yep, and he needed a 2/3 majority of that because that's the law as per the Fixed Term Parliament Act, which is the same thing that Theresa May used in 2017 because Jeremy Corbyn voted with her on that, because in normal times, if you can call 2017 normal times, the leader
it feels
of the
way more normal than now.
It does, I know, which is absolutely crazy considering that it was post-referendum times. But Jeremy Corbyn voted Theresa May then because, as I say, even when with him down something like 15 points in the polls then, the leader of the opposition could never be seen as not wanting a general election unless there were very, very exceptional circumstances, which is kind of what we've seen this week. The government's line on he's scared, he's a chicken is, I think, it's what they have to say, but at the same time, Jeremy Corbyn is doing the smart political thing right now because he is, if he blocks no deal Brexit, which is effectively his line, he is going to draw a lot of support back from the Lib Dems, I believe. Because
do you think so?
I would. I mean, it's not. It's difficult for me to say as somebody who's not a Remain voter, but I can see a lot of Remain voters who were very lukewarm on Jeremy Corbyn going back to him because he will be the man who stopped it.
I see a certain contingent. Yeah, I see a certain contingent of people who went Lib Dem, at least for the European elections, or maybe for certain local elections, because they're not quite hard enough left to back Corbyn in to back Corbyn completely throughout this situation. You know, with sort of Corbyn's ambiguity towards his own position and the party position on Brexit.
Well, that was why a lot of people went away from him in the first place, and he's kind of reversed it now.
By that same token, there are a big constituency of, you know, I suppose people maybe aged in the 30s upwards who are generally more new Labour centrists who have gone Lib Dem kind of naturally, who I just don't see coming back. At least for the time being.
While Corbyn's still in charge.
While Corbyn's still in charge and while McDonald's kind of pulling the strings.
For those types of people, I think you're right, but I think he can get the young people back on his side because the polls have shown from recently.
Generally, the young people have not left his side though. Anyway,
no, they have. I think a lot of people, particularly his support among students, has effectively halved in the last since the last election, where lots of people were up for it. Those people will come. Those young people will come swarming back. It's a chance of
as much as I don't always want to trust polls not because I think there's any kind of conspiracy, but more just because we've seen polls can be absolutely wrong in the past.
That's true, very true.
Labour has dropped to what, 4th position in the polls?
They at the time last I looked, they were roughly that level with the Lib Dems.
Which, by the way, the two main parties in British politics dropping to 4th and 5th position. Is it 4th and 3rd or 4th and 5th? I can't remember. It's mental.
It's absolutely nuts. I mean, at one point you had 4 parties on 20%.
Yeah.
When you had the Lib Dems, Brexit Party, Labour and Tories all roughly around 20%. And that was before Johnson became in charge.
Yeah.
In between the sort of Tory election campaign, which again feels a million miles away at this point.
Yeah.
You know, it was only a couple of months ago.
Everything feels a million years ago before the last 2 weeks.
Yeah, it's because there was so much that happened every single day. I mean, when Johnson lost his majority on Monday, which was a clear... I think the Lib Dems have been planning these defections for a long time. They've just been waiting for the opportunity.
Yes.
And I think there's a lot more still to come.
When it seemed like a crisis.
Yes, exactly.
And I mean, there's now no Tory majority in House, which is scary actually. When you think about it.
And that happened before Johnson had even expelled the parties because of what was his name, Lee.
It was Thingy Lee, who was the MP. Is the MP for Bracknell.
Yeah,
that's a really interesting situation because I've been aware of that situation for a little while because Lee has been the MP of Bracknell for a little while. He's generally a Remain member of the Conservative Party, and his own local Conservative Party in Bracknell had a no confidence vote in him about a month or two ago, maybe 2 months ago, 3 months ago, and he lost the vote. But he hasn't stepped down.
No.
And so he's pulled a Corbyn on that one on a more sort of micro scale. I think Bracknell's a very, very hard leave area.
It's not. It's 53%.
It's 53.
Yeah, I was surprised at that as well.
That surprises me because I kind of know Bracknell just because I used to do a bit of work out there, and let's just say it's one of those interesting places.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of commuters who also live there because it's quite easy to get to London from Bracknell.
Yeah, it's relatively easy. I think there's some. I mean, most big towns in the UK, there's a European community that lives there, particularly from the Central European countries. But Bracknell, it's the start of the West Country in Berkshire, so it's generally where people start to get a West Country accent. The locals, it's a bit more of a more kind of agricultural kind of culture and society around there, even though it's quite a big town. It's quite, I don't want to call it poor because it's not all poor. There's quite a lot of middle class people who live there on the outskirts of town. You've got Bracknell Forest, which is a beautiful forest. But it's generally, for somewhere so close to London, it doesn't feel like London.
No, it doesn't.
It is the West Country.
It feels like a proper English town, as it were. It feels more like out of London than Reading, which is odd because Reading is actually further west.
Well, I mean, they're in the same county. Is Reading actually further west than Bracknell?
Yeah.
It wouldn't surprise me, actually, if it is, but...
Yeah, it's just a little bit more. There's only a couple stops on the train station because.
But I think because Reading has so many people coming in and out of town in a more transient way, there's less locals than there are. Bracknell is we are the locals. We have come from an agricultural background, and we're now kind of a begrudging new town.
Yes, and obviously there's a big university in Reading, which was my alma mater. So,
didn't you used to work in Bracknell as well?
Yeah, I worked in the Waitrose warehouse in Bracknell. Because I worked in the freezing one, which was an interesting experience.
I used to work for a security firm here in London quite a few years ago, and there was a firm based in Bracknell that would subcontract some of our guys on a load of their jobs out there. Some in London, but a lot of them out there, sort of in the kind of Berkshire, Hampshire area. And I became one of the guys they liked, so I even got subcontracted on jobs kind of on my own. They just pick me up in the middle of London, take me out. And and I got to know that area a little bit, Bracknell, Basingstoke. Interesting place, for somewhere so close to London, very, very different. And the point we're going back to is, what is his name? Lee. It's something Lee.
It's something Lee. Mr. Lee.
We're going to call him Mr. Lee. Lee has lost. He basically, as we said, he lost a no confidence vote in Bracknell. I'm surprised it was only a 53% leave vote. And basically, so even before the 21 members of the party were kicked out for voting against the government, I mean, that they'd already lost the majority. So
he literally walked over during Boris's speech.
So from losing the majority and being at a neutral position, they've now lost a further 21 MPs, which is fucking ridiculous.
It's nuts. I mean,
because you're now closing the gap on Labour.
Yeah, but it is crazy when you think about that. But for general election purposes, all I pretty much think, and I really do think this is the only way to actually get this so that the Tory party can be somewhat united at some point is to basically have those people resign, which I think about half of them have already said they're not going to stand anyway.
Really?
Loads of them have said they're not going to stand. Letwin said he wasn't going to stand. King Clark isn't going to stand.
Well, I can't blame Clark because Clark's is he late 70s now?
Yeah. He's been there for nearly 50 years, which is absolute. No, he's been a member of the Tory party for nearly 50 years. Sorry.
I mean, there's a reason he's referred to as the father of the house.
Yeah, which is an official position.
Yes.
As is, I think, a newly created position recently, the mother of the house, which is held by Harriet Harman.
Yes. I mean, if you could think of two eternal heavy hitters, well, I can't call Clark an eternal heavy hitter in the Conservative Party anymore.
Not anymore.
It is Harriet Harman for Labour, and it is Ken Clark for the Conservative. And for me, for someone who's not a member of the Tory Party, is of an adjacent party who generally shares a lot of, I suppose, political ideology with people like Ken Clarke. It's sad.
It is sad, but I would also... it is sad.
It's because because I know you are a Conservative supporter.
Yeah.
The more your party goes, and the same goes for Labour. The more your party goes down this route, and you've actually now taken over Labour in regards to deselection and kicking people out of the party, kicking MPs out of the party.
Yep. A lot more quicker and a lot more ruthless.
Yeah, you're now at a rapid speed. You're losing essentially your electoral force.
And the amount of political capital that has been lost through the last week has just been absolutely crazy, because I think a lot of people, listening to a lot of people,
in terms of Conservative establishment, I mean, who have you got left? I mean, I suppose May's now a backbencher.
Yeah. I doubt that she'll run again in the next election as well. She'll probably quietly resign like Cameron did.
So yeah, in terms of that old guard establishment, May's now a backbencher. Hammond's been kicked out of the party. Clarke's been kicked out of the party. Mm-hmm. Rory Stewart, who was always kind of in the wings, has been kicked out.
It's effectively the One Nation wing of the Conservative Party is not really a wing of the Conservative Party anymore.
It's literally, you've got Gove left. Away from Johnson, you've got Gove.
Yeah, and there's almost the new establishment which is coming up. I think
Hunt as well, but yeah.
Yeah, Hunt's another one who I think will, again, he'll quietly resign and then probably come back after Johnson is not there, possibly when he...
Do you see Hunt resigning?
As an MP, I think he would gain more from the sort of One Nation, and he would gain his reputation better if he came back once the Tory party are in opposition. I see a lot of people coming back to that. I mean, I don't know. I'm not saying that's... I'm not going to say when that is, but...
It was odd. I mean, it got so weird at the end of the last electoral race between... when it came down to Hunt and Johnson, that even Hunt to... Again, non-Tory members, and particularly sort of, I'm not going to say necessarily Remainers, but soft leavers or deal leavers, even Hunt was starting to seem like an option, or a more sensible option than Johnson. Even though in reality he was just a puppet to look like there was a fair contest between Johnson and the rest of the party when there wasn't.
Yeah, it's crazy how Jeremy Hunt, he was offered the a position down, and he refused to take it.
Yep.
Which effectively says that even if you are just a puppet, I don't want the puppet in my government. Which is odd, because he gave Michael Gove a very important position. He basically made him in charge of preparing for no deal Brexit.
Well, you know what that means. I mean, there's bad blood between Johnson and Gove, as much as they're seen as the same person to a certain degree. There's so much bad blood between the two of them that, of course, Johnson's going to shove him in that position. The one person who takes the shit if everything hits the pan.
That's actually true. Yeah, I hadn't thought about it like that. That's a good point. But sort of going back to the idea of the general election, where Labour have changed their position on this a few times this week. Where at the beginning of the week, when it was quite funny, because Corbyn came out of his house and told the press that he was agreeing with the Prime Minister that a general election had happened, and then the entire left-wing establishment said no, and sort of said no. Tony Blair even came out and said it's an elephant trap, which doing his best Anwar Akbar impression. But he, and then eventually, and I think this is now Corbyn's MO, he's just listening to what other people tell him to do. I think he has realised that he is a strategic idiot.
That's been Corbyn for maybe a year now.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe even as far back as post, maybe a year after the referendum, he's been this way because momentum effectively has to tell him what to do, because he can't essentially show his colours and his revolutionary kind of mandate in his own mind, because momentum has control of the party and he can't act the way he'd want to act.
Yes. But I think particularly in the last few months, he's listening a lot more to the, as they call themselves, the Remain alliance, as it were, and taking their opinions on board more, because I think he sees it as the only way that people are going to vote for Labour is if they believe that they are truly a Remain party in the next election, or vote for Labour in great numbers, as it were. So We've Corbyn effectively doing, I would say, the correct strategic move, but changing his mind as well. I mean, you've had a lot of things, a lot of correct accusations from the government that they say one thing one day and then do another thing the next day.
Yeah.
And Labour did the same thing this week, saying, we want the general election, but we want it after the bill has achieved royal assent.
So, yeah.
And now they're saying, we're not going to do it until the EU have agreed, and I would imagine they're going to push that back even further, because it's actually politically beneficial for Johnson to be in number 10.
This is why earlier I said Johnson will eat his words in regards to that statement of I'd rather be dead in a ditch than leave, than extend the leaving date. He will eat his words, because the only outcome from this coming week, from Monday, so on Monday there will be a vote to basically, one, ratify the blocking of a no-deal Brexit.
Yeah, which is a procedural thing, really. It's already effectively been approved by Parliament.
Yeah. And that can only lead to one thing, because also there is another vote. Again, Johnson is motioning on the same day to again give Labour a chance to vote for a general election. The reality is they're not going to vote for that.
No.
So that
they'll abstain like they did last week.
So it means one thing, or it could potentially mean two. But reality means one, which I predicted since the last day we did not leave the EU, which was back in April or May. It will just be another extension of.
Yeah.
It will be another extension of the leaving date,
and
that's going to carry on from all I can predict for now, at least for a couple of years.
Unfortunately, unless the only way that's going to change is if there is a decent sized majority for either Labour or the Tory party on a mandate that is actually clear, which I don't see happening even in a snapshot.
I'm going to go out on a whim now and say I actually see another Prime Minister going into office before we leave.
Yeah, I don't think that's too controversial. I don't think that's too.
I don't see Johnson being in place by the time we leave.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that. The sad thing is that if he's not in charge, then the only person I see being the next Prime Minister would probably be Corbyn, as it were. Unfortunately, because whatever you might think on Brexit, I think that man is going to be an absolute disaster on a domestic agenda.
People. I would go with people when they say, no matter what you think about Brexit, Corbyn's mismanagement of finances and of the coffers will generally be will basically be way more of a devastating effect than Brexit. Well, the two things go hand in hand. If we've got both Brexit and we have Corbyn leaving, those things, vice versa. Sorry, we're both leaving the EU and we've got Corbyn becoming Prime Minister. Those things go hand in hand because you have a hardline socialist who's been anti-EU his whole life, or his whole political career. Then taking charge of free trade agreements with our biggest trading bloc and trading partners.
Yeah, and he'll have to get a deal through if he's the one who's going to try and get a deal through. Then Emily Thornberry was on Question Time this week, and she said something which was absolutely astounding and just completely laughable, where she was claiming that if Labour were in charge, she would elect to negotiate with the EU, would get a deal, and then would call a separate referendum and campaign against her own deal.
You've actually done Thornbury's cadence there. A weird, patronising Emily Thornbury cadence.
Yeah. And it's just extraordinary to me, because that's effectively saying, she said, it would be a good deal, it would be a deal that protects jobs and protects all these things. Why would you make a good deal if you're going to campaign against it? Surely you would want to make a bad deal so that people wouldn't vote for it. So that is effectively Labour's position and Labour's strategy, which is to not get Brexit at all. And that's the sort of running theme, I think, with the Tory rebels and the Dems and the SNP, is all of this politicking is...
Which is ridiculous, because that leads to deadlock and it leads to basically a political vacuum. It will, if you go down that route, you then end up with a political vacuum because no one sees you as representing them, or at least Leave voters who are the majority for now believe that you are not representing them, and guess what? A more extreme force comes into play.
Yeah, there's only one man that Leave voters actually trust to represent them.
And it's Uncle Nigel, unfortunately.
But with Nigel as well, it's difficult because I really don't know, apart from a few different things, his domestic policies agendas, because he's always effectively done what UKIP have told him to do on that.
Well, there's only really one agenda that people outside of Brexit know is definitely his agenda, and he's kind of confirmed that in recent months. Is he does essentially believe in one way or another the privatisation of the NHS. And I mean, yes, he's on record on film, on video, and in audio saying this, years ago, that he essentially believes in one way or another not carving up, but essentially privatising the different sections of the NHS, or essentially having private companies take over the management of those individual sectors within the NHS. He actually did say, this goes back to a few months ago when Trump sort of promptly said in that press conference that the NHS will be on the trade table, will be on trade negotiation tables, and basically Farage defended him and said, well, why wouldn't they be? We should have it on the table. We essentially want to, again, just confirm in his position.
Yeah, he couldn't say a bad word about Donnick, could he? No. He might not get invited back to a rally.
It also just happened to actually confirm his own beliefs. We do know,
Yeah. I mean, it leads on to a point which is something that if we you have to think about early, particularly if you are a Labour supporter and you're going to vote for the Brexit Party, and that it's the Brexit Party, but as the collapse of UKIP has shown us, as soon as a political force gets its aim, it's going to collapse. And I think the Brexit Party is going to be an even bigger and faster collapse than UKIP, because UKIP was based on the right, whereas the Brexit Party spans even more of a spectrum.
I'll tell you why I don't believe it will get that far, is because I actually don't see, as much as earlier on this episode I said, definitely the Brexit Party are actually more of a political force than UKIP, potentially. I actually don't see the Brexit Party taking any seats anytime soon, just because we're in such a weird position at the moment.
It's first past the post, which is probably the biggest
obstacle to it. Yeah, and just because of that, I don't see them coming to any kind of political power in regards to even having one or two seats in Parliament. So I believe a Brexit Party collapse is actually kind of inconsequential.
I can see what you're saying, but it would slam even harder, as I said, because let's just say, in a completely hypothetical scenario, that Nigel Farage did get into number 10 on the Brexit Party agenda, but he also had a lot of constituencies in the north that were very left-leaning.
Yeah.
He's never, ever going to get his own MPs to support privatising the NHS.
No.
So how is he going to run a government on anything apart from Brexit?
His second in command, who is the ex-leader of the UK Communist Party, should not fucking go for that.
No, exactly. So this is why I think that I would actually say that if he wanted a lot more political clout, he should say, I promise to, as soon as it's over, as soon as Brexit actually happens, to disband the party. I would say that should be in the Brexit Party's constitution if they want people to take them seriously.
Because then it becomes, as we said, a power vacuum, and it also becomes a quest for meaning. The same with UKIP.
Yes,
so
exactly.
The quest for meaning eventually just means they ended up just becoming a weird anti-Islam, just one issue anti-Islam party.
Yeah, and they drove anyone out who was on the more libertarian side of the UKIP wing completely out of it. Because I was looking at that with interesting thoughts as someone who has a lot of sympathies to libertarian sort of ideas, or not so much on the extreme economic end.
Yeah.
But it panned out that they, just as you say, went to the more EDL sort of appealing type, as it were.
I mean, if you actually see any of those marches and how the UKIP are involved with through London, it's just the same old far right hooligans and figures that were on all those marches beforehand. The EDL marches, mainly it's all EDL members there.
Yeah.
You've got some more extreme kind of groups from up in the northeast. So essentially the BNP, the UKIP is now just essentially the BNP.
Yeah.
And you have to remember they've lost all their seats in Parliament. They only had 2.
Yeah.
They had, unsurprisingly, they had one in Kent and one in Essex. And
And
they've lost them both.
Yeah, and I would predict that all the council seats that they have across the UK, every time there's going to be an election,
they're going to lose more and more.
Yeah, they're going to lose. They're just going to bleed out. There may be a few councillors who the locals actually really genuinely like, who can stick in for a few years, but they will be the exception, not the rule.
Yeah.
So I think we will move on, or sort of give our predictions for what they were for the next week.
Next week, I don't see much change. I see obviously the snap election being blocked, which is a given.
Yeah.
I see the motion to finalise the blocking of a no-deal Brexit obviously being finalised, going through. I see the start. We're going to see in the next few weeks some quivering symptoms of fear about a no-deal Brexit.
Yeah.
But I think eventually it will just naturally just become an extension of the Brexit process again.
I think that's the most likely outcome as well. Although I would say something which I heard was interesting about how potentially Boris could still get a no deal, and how it could also pan into go quite well with his election strategy of Parliament knows the people and making the EU into the bad guy.
Yeah.
He could lawfully, and this is only a theoretical thing because I don't think it would be very clever of him, refuse to appoint a European Commissioner. And if you refuse to do that, you're effectively breaking EU law number one.
And that's actually grounds to be kicked out of the EU.
Exactly. Which without a deal.
But saying that though, if inconsequential countries such as Hungary are failing to be kicked out of the EU at the moment, despite completely breaking every rule within EU judiciary, then how the fuck would we be kicked out?
It's a good question. I mean, Hungary's another one which is interesting because if Johnson had a quiet phone call to Mr. Orban and said, would you mind vetoing this thing coming up?
Which is in discussions anyway.
Exactly. The best thing for Johnson to happen is something that he can't push for would be for the French to veto it. Because
there is a want for that.
Macron is getting bloody pissed off with the whole thing.
Yeah.
And if the French are the ones who Johnson can blame for a no-deal Brexit as opposed to not actually himself,
then we just go full circle, essentially, in terms of blaming the French for everything. Sorry, going as you were saying.
Yeah, it would. You can have sort of the Agincourt campaign coming back out, and there's nothing that Conservative voters would love more than a reason to start hating the French again.
But as much as we as British people love blaming the EU or blaming people from Central and Eastern Europe, there's no one they want to blame more than the French.
Yeah,
for anything.
It's almost a national treasure and a pastime, as it were.
Ever since they, our royal, essentially our first, as being the United English, our royal family was made up of the French. There's nothing we've loved more than bashing the French.
Yeah, pretty much. We had the aptly or disaptly named 100 Years' War, and as I say, we've been close allies ever since the Crimean War, effectively.
Yeah.
But there's always still that potential. Like there's always the potential for the French and the Germans.
Just to explain this to anyone who might not be from the UK. Our governments, as in the British and French, close allies, we share cross communications, i.e. the Channel Tunnel, means of transport and communications between each other. We have our trade between each other in terms of freight is vital.
Yeah.
And so we have very close political alignment naturally with France. But for some reason, we as people, the British and French, we just can't get on.
Yeah, it's quite odd, and we can get on with the odd people, as it were, but as a whole, it feels more natural to be shouting at each other than it does to be getting along.
There's no specific reason as to why. There's no event. There's no recent history, World War II type thing. We just don't like each other for some reason.
Yeah, I think it's just. There's always the thing with the food as well, because the French, in particular, not a lot of people like our food, but in particular, the French deride us for that.
Yeah.
And we deride them for their, complete lack of cultural output.
And for some reason, so we hate the French, and within that group, we love the Dutch for some reason. So
I love the Dutch.
we all love the Dutch. It's hilarious. Maybe it's just because when they speak English, they sound like us. I don't know, but it's odd.
It is, and historically we were always quite close allies of the Dutch. We were the first early adopters of financial systems and capitalism, both seafaring people as well.
Yeah, and I suppose Germanic speakers too. It doesn't mean we like the Germans. I love Germany, and a lot of people have now come round to the idea of Germany being this all ominous force within Europe, and they are the big economy. But there's a lot of sentiment within British people that kind of hates the Germans in Germany.
Yeah, it's another one which it just comes almost naturally, as it were.
Yeah.
And that goes even to the extension of the fact that whilst we want Germany to be strong, and we want Germany, particularly the German economy, to keep chugging along.
I don't know if you want Leave vote. I don't think a lot of Leave voters particularly want Germany to be strong. They seem to want Brexit to destroy the German economy for some reason.
I think that that's not going to happen.
No, in no way is it going to happen, but there's this weird sort of jingoistic rhetoric within Leave voters who and I'm not saying Leave voters know nothing or are not, have no knowledge of international trade and economies. The point I'm making is Leave voters, they're generally just kind of jingoistic and don't have any kind of idea of international trade. They seem to think and seem to want that if we have a no-deal Brexit, it's going to destroy the Germans, which is bollocks.
No, I think that's a line that's been sold to them by politicians. If they thought about it for a few minutes, would be dispelled, as it were. I can say it. I'm very stupid. I'm a Leave voter. I get a pass.
I'm not calling Leave vote stupid. I'm saying there's a certain contingent who are not quite savvy within current political situations, within certain economies, within Europe's importance and size. They don't seem to understand. There's this weird train of thought that Britain is this is the most the richest and most powerful country within Europe, yet it's separate from the European going-ons and agenda, which is kind of true. We have our own sphere of influence around the world, like the Commonwealth and that, but we are not separate from what goes on in Europe. We are not a separate entity, but also we are pretty much the third power behind Germany and France.
When it comes to European politics, certainly. When it comes to global politics, I would say that us and the French are sort of on level peggings on that regard.
Would you really put in Germany behind France in terms of international clout?
Yeah, they don't have an army. They don't have an army. They don't have a seat in the UN Security Council.
They have an army. They just haven't. They've just used it for the first time in '97.
They technically have an army, but
it's not.
It's not really an army. Not for the size of country.
Size of country and importance. Yeah. They. I mean, I think I'm right in saying they only got rid of conscription. Sorry. I think in recent years. I remember about 12 years ago. Reading about teenagers dodging the draft in Germany.
That's very interesting, because I would have thought that because banning conscription was one of the aspects of the Treaty of Versailles.
I think 97, when the memoriam was up on German military usage, I think they then opted for conscription. Someone can obviously can correct me on that, but I think that's the case for the moment.
It might be a sort of national service.
Which I think that makes it and Lithuania the only two countries in Europe that have brought back conscription.
Interesting.
In recent times.
Interesting.
That was 97. Lithuania, I think, brought back conscription about 2 or 3 years ago now in retaliation to what happened in Ukraine with Russia.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Would probably be making moves myself if I was me in that situation, because that's a whole another kettle of fish.
But just to outro this, because we've pretty much gone over time now, and there's not really much else we can say. We've already gave our predictions for next week. For the time being on the schedule, we're going to keep the Germany episode open for next week. Because in all honesty, I predict a deadlock next week, so I don't think there's going to be too much to talk about.
Yeah.
But if there's not a deadlock and all of a sudden things have gone wild, let's say Parliament is wilding out, so to speak.
Or if Johnson does actually bite the bullet and resign, which is very unlikely.
It's unlikely, but let's just say things really, go mental, then we'll throw Germany aside for, again, next week. But for now, I'm looking at 2 Weiss and beer glasses, and I'm kind of tempted to keep Germany on the table for next week. I think we're going to up the research for next week's episode.
Yeah.
And to be fair, my journey getting over here today was kind of rushed, so I couldn't really bring any kind of German-related things over.
Yeah, we've got to have a beer when we're talking about Germany.
Yeah. So for now, Joe Wood signing off. Tom?
Yeah, Tom Hicks signing off as well.
Just quick update. We're now switching everything to YouTube. I don't think that our current videos are now up on SoundCloud. Our podcast, the episodes. So by the time you're hearing this, it'll be YouTube. So see you then. Bye.